Right, go ahead. Wish I was dead.
Why? I won't do it. I won't.
Because you're a liar, aren't you?
But don't say that.
You're a liar, Mr. Fettle. You're a liar.
Keep away from me, please. I don't want anything to happen to you.
Anything to hang on to your little fantasy. Anything to sit here in the park and keep someone talking to you. You're lonely, Mr. Fettle, and you're a little bit nutty, if you ask me.
Don't make me do it, please, Mr. Stone. Don't get near me that way.
Then say it. I said say it. Despite myself, the sweat was beginning to bubble on my forehead. I could feel the back of my shirt getting wet. I could have kicked myself up and down State Street for being sucked into this old man's stupid little nightmare. But there I was, like a Madison Street mooch, insisting that the guy prove it. Not to himself anymore, but to me. Go ahead, Mr. Fettle, say it.
Please don't make me, Mr. Stone.
He cringed away from me now, and his back was pressing up against a tree, and I kept following him. As I got closer to him, he had no other place to run. And he stood there with the most peculiar expression in his eyes.
All right, Mr. Stone. But it's not my fault, understand? I don't want to do it, understand?
I understand. Now say it.
Please forgive me, Mr. Stone, but you're making me, isn't that right? You're making me say it.
Well, say it and get it over with.
I wish you were... I can't. I just can't.
There's no use pretending I wasn't relieved. I felt both frightened and silly playing this little game.
I just couldn't do it to you, Mr. Stone. I'm not angry. I've gotten to know you and like you. It's become so personal. I wouldn't want anything to happen to you.
As he talked, his eyes became fixed on the building opposite the park. It was a tall building, and way up high, about the 18th story, there was a man up there washing windows.
You see that up there? You see him?
The window washing?
There's nothing personal about him, is there? Just a speck crawling on the side of a building washing windows.
You're going to start that all over again.
Well, there's nothing personal about that. That speck up there, is there?
Now, look, you're not going to drive me back.
Well, if you'll only believe me, I'll try to show you.
You mean with the window washing?
He's pretty far away, and it's so impersonal, and, well, it may not work.
Of course it won't work. That's what I've been trying to tell you.
Well, I mean my not knowing him. Maybe I have to know the person, or be real close. Maybe I have to have an argument with the person, or not like him.
Yeah, like the pigeon.
Oh, well, that was different. I actually looked into the pigeon's eyes, and he looked at me. And that's when I said it.
Yeah. Oh, why don't you go home and go to bed? Read a good book. Forget about yourself.
You're going?
That's right.
Oh, wait. I'll do it.
I stood there watching him. He stared at the man on the 18th floor for a long time. As the man started to change his safety belt to move from one window ledge to the next, just as he took off one rope from the bolt on the window frame, Mr. Fettle started to whisper.
I wish you were dead.
It all happened in a split second. The moment he said it, the man on the window ledge lost his balance. First, the bucket came clattering to the ground. And then, the man hung suspended, dangling by one rope and clawing at the air to get back on the ledge. And then the rope broke. And the man fell to the ground. When it happened, I ran over to the building and got what few facts were available. The item appeared in a late edition, about 10 lines on page 8. Naturally, I said nothing to the little old man on the park bench, or they would have thought I was as insane as I felt the little guy to be. But I couldn't get the amazing Mr. Fettle out of my mind. When I started to feel that I, in some weird manner, were indirectly responsible for the window washer's death, then I knew I was involved up to my neck. I went downstairs to the newspaper library. I found the item I was looking for. Arthur E. Brown, president of the Utilities Loan Association, had succumbed to a heart attack and was pronounced dead upon the arrival of his personal physician, George Watkins. The first thing next morning, I went to see Dr. Watkins.
I'll be glad to give you whatever information you want, Mr. Stone, but I'm also rather curious as to your reasons.
Well, in a very general way, I'm interested in certain types of death.
Oh, coronary, heart fatalities?
You might call it that.
What is it you wanted to know?
Well, as I understand it, there was someone present in Mr. Brown's office at the time he died.
I believe so. One of his employees.
I'm wondering if this man could have in any way brought on the heart attack.
It's possible. But that particular day, not at all probable.
Why not?
Mr. Brown had complained of a severe constriction across the chest, and his secretary had already called me before that man was in his office. In fact, I was on my way over to his office before he succumbed. Mr. Brown's secretary was in the first aid room getting him some medicine.
You mean Brown was already dying before the man even got into the office?
Mr. Brown was already dying of the effects of an extraordinary lunch. With the kind of heart condition he had, his death was just as inevitable as tomorrow's sunrise.
It couldn't be any plainer than that. Coincidence number one had been taken care of quite neatly. But that window washer still had to be dealt with. For a man who'd been washing windows for so many years to slip off the windowsill and then for the rope to break right at the time my amazing Mr. Fettle wished he were dead. Well, that's a pretty touchy thing to reconcile the coincidence. I went back to the building and located the engineer who was in the basement replacing a steam valve on the hot water tank. At first, he wasn't very cooperative.
I suppose you're another insurance man who wants to know more about why we don't have safety measures for our window washers.
No. I just happened to be a newspaper man who was sitting in the park when it happened.
Well, if you saw it, you know more about it than I do.
He worked for you, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, what happened? Why should that man's rope break?
I'm tired of answering questions. That's all I've been doing is asking questions.
Well, look, mister, I'm not here to make trouble for you. I don't want to give you any bad publicity. I want to know why it happened, but... Of course, if you don't want to tell me, then I've got to believe that the building was responsible.
If I warned him once, I warned him 100 times. His equipment was rotted through. I told him he couldn't go to work on my building unless he bought new ropes. He was pretty sore, but he went home. At least I thought he went home. What happened was he got lost in one of the bars on Clark Street, and when he was good and drunk, he came back. Without me knowing that he went to work. He was drunk, that's what he was. It was nobody's fault but his own.
If it wasn't for the fact that somebody else had suffered, the whole thing would have been funny. It was the most ironic joke that coincidence could play. On a pathetic old man who thought he had some kind of strange power, and on me, a sucker for anybody's story if they insist they've got one. I got Mr. Fettle's address from Miss Johnson at the place he used to work and went over to see him. He lived in an old boarding house. His landlady was a nice old gray-haired woman that was as interested in knowing where he could be found as I was.
He hasn't been home since yesterday. And that's not like him. 15 years he's lived here. And he never spent a night away from home.
But does he have any relatives or friends that he could have gone to?
Not a soul, sir. The loneliest man I ever knew. But the nicest. Why, he just wouldn't hurt a soul.
Well, I've got to find him.
Oh, but something's wrong, isn't there?
No. I've got a pretty important message for him, and it'll make things a lot easier on him when I tell him.
I see. Can't you tell me?
No, it's rather personal. Here's my number, though. You can reach me at the office. No matter what time he gets in, if you have any regard for him at all, please call me.
I certainly will, sir. And nobody has better regard for him than I have. He's been getting awful thin lately. Yes, you'd think a man wouldn't starve himself just because he was out of work. Now, would you, sir?
Well, you call me. It'll be a lot different after I talk to him. I went to the office by way of Bughouse Square. I inquired here and there about an old gent with the white hair and the strawberry-colored eyebrows. They knew who he was, all right, but they hadn't seen him. I was getting worried about him. A nice little guy somewhere in the city running away from himself, thinking he was a dangerous killer. When I got to the office, there were no messages. I put my feet on the desk and I waited. And I started to do my column with coincidence playing the villain. I got halfway through, put my feet back on the desk, and dozed off. 2:00 in the morning, the phone rang. Yeah.
Mr. Stone?
Speaking.
He just came in just now.
Who?
Mr. Fettle.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm coming right over. When I got to the house, she was waiting and had the door open before I could ring the bell. Is he in bed?
No, Mr. Stone. He's sitting in his easy chair.
His room upstairs?
It's no use going up there, Mr. Stone.
Well, what's wrong?
Well, as soon as I called you, I put some soup on the stove. You see, I wanted him to have something hot to eat. I knocked on his door, but, well, he didn't answer. I opened it, and he was sitting in the easy chair. Before I got to him, his eyes went up at the ceiling. Then they closed, and his head rolled on his chest. He was dead.
I can't understand it. He wasn't sick. He was unhappy, but he wasn't sick.
It doesn't make much difference now what he was. Poor soul.
That's all that happened? Just what you told me? He didn't say anything?
Well, he mumbled something, but it's not worth repeating.
What? I want to know.
Some sort of foolishness, Mr. Stone.
Well, tell me. I've got to know.
I'm sure I heard it wrong.
Well, what was it that he said?
Well, as his eyes were on the ceiling, it seemed to me... Now, sir, I can be wrong, you know, but it seemed to me that he said, I wish I was dead.
Sitting on a park bench in the warm sun doesn't always lead to peace of mind. Not if you happen to be a harmless little guy who draws the ace of spades every time he makes a wish. Of course, we know that everything that happened was just coincidence. We all know things like this don't happen. You know, like the flying saucer. Copy, boy.
You are listening to Night Beat on the Wheaties Big Parade.
It's always nice if you like your work, which is why we feel we're pretty lucky to be in the Wheaties business. We love Wheaties, and we love people. We know that these little golden flakes of 100% whole wheat are good for people. So what could be more pleasant work than getting people and Wheaties together just as often as we can? Your grocer knows about Wheaties and people. See him, why don't you?
Night Beat, starring Frank Lovejoy, is produced and directed by Warren Lewis and edited by Larry Marcus. Tonight's story was written by David Peltz, with music by Frank Worth. The part of Mr. Fettle was played by Bill Johnstone. Others in tonight's cast were Joan Banks, Martha Wentworth, Harley Bear, Charles Seal, Stan Farrar, and Jeffrey Silver. Listen next week at this same time and every week as Randy Stone searches through the city for the strange stories waiting for him in the darkness.
And this is your Wheaties man, Frank Martin, inviting you to listen also on Wednesday night to Brian Donlevy in Dangerous Assignment on the Wheaties Big Parade. See you then.
Going to bake a pie sometime soon? Make it with Crust Quick, the Betty Crocker pie crust mix. You know, it's a tender, flaky crust that's at the bottom of every delicious pie, sure as you use Crust Quick. And so easy.
Just add water to Crust Quick.
And what pie crust? Tender crust, tasty crust, rich, short, lovely crust, just like Betty Crocker makes. And you can make it.
Just add water to Crust Quick.
Crust Quick, the Betty Crocker pie crust mix. Night Beat came to you from Hollywood with portions transcribed. Stay tuned for Christopher London over most NBC stations.